Hi, I'm Jessica Medlin from the Arizona Geographic Alliance. This is a 5th grade lesson lasting 2 class periods titled All Aboard the Orphan Trains. So orphan or neglected children played a part in Western expansion and settlement of the United States from 1853 to 1929. Understanding Western expansion through the eyes of a child unaware of his or her future helps students relate differently to relocation and Western expansion. In this lesson, students will understand the role orphan children played in the settlement of the West by exploring personal stories and their railroad routes across the United States to start a new life with a new family. The materials that you'll need include a student PowerPoint of maps, images, and poems, which is included in the lesson, a New York Times article called Orphans Return to a City They Left on Sad Trains, and there's an advantages and disadvantages worksheet. There's a placement of orphan train riders and the Arizona story, letter to New York City, U.S. railroad map, atlases, and a 6-trait writing rubric. The students will be able to locate orphan train destination cities on a map, draw train routes for different orphan train travelers, compare and contrast rural and urban life as an orphan, list advantages and disadvantages of the orphan train movement, and write a letter to a child's caseworker taking on the role of an orphan train child. So the students will need prior knowledge on Western expansion in the 1800s and understand what life was like in rural America during this time period. So you'll use the student PowerPoint to help with directions, and you'll explain to the students that they are going to go on a long journey and that they are going to list items they would pack if they were going on a long trip. They're going to work with partners. You can seat them across from each other or next to each other, and you'll time them for 2 minutes. They get to write down 1 item per turn, and they're passing the paper back and forth without talking. They can't repeat anything, and they'll need to stop when you get through the 2 minutes. This is what the instructions look like from the PowerPoint. So you're going on a very long trip, and you're going to be gone a long time, and they can't talk. They pass it back and forth with a partner. So then with the PowerPoint, you'll explain the rules have changed. You'll tell them you are now moving to a new location, and I can't even tell you where you're going because I don't know where it is. I don't know what the climate's like. And they'll need to use the same list and prioritize items that you have chosen because you're only now going to be allowed a small carry-on size suitcase. And you can even bring in a carry-on suitcase so the kids can understand how big that is. So you'll have the students pass the paper back and forth the same way, but this time they can circle items they've already written, or they can add something new. So you'll probably want to tell the students that this time they won't be able to fit their Nintendo Wiis or anything big in their suitcases. So you'll give background information on the orphan train movement from the PowerPoint, and you'll explain that these children sometimes traveled with only a change of underwear. So the list that they just made with all of the clothes and items that they were able to fit, these children only were allowed something they could carry in their hands. You'll then give the definition of a waif to the class, and you'll read the poem, Only a Waif, together as a class. And you'll discuss what it means to be a poor orphan child. So this is the background information from the orphan train student PowerPoint. So you'll tell them that there were many homeless or orphan children on the streets of New York City, and they did everything they could to survive. They were stealing, they were begging, they were out on the streets. And it was hard for people to figure out what to do with these children. So organizations came up with the idea to send them westward and place them with new families. There were people out westward who needed a lot of good labor to get their farms working and build homes. And for some, this worked really well. But for other children, things were not good at all. They just became slaves. So here's the definition from the PowerPoint. And here is the poem. So then you'll have the students read the newspaper article, Orphans Return to a City They Left on Sad Trains. You'll have them read with a partner, and it is about some of the orphans who rode the trains and what happened to them. And while they're reading, you'll have them compare and contrast urban life in New York and compare it with rural life in the United States. And to close, you'll have the partners share with the class similarities and differences from their charts. This is what the newspaper article looks like. And you'll remind students of the newspaper article for the second session to start off with, and you'll have them complete the advantages and disadvantages worksheet. So for example, an advantage of the orphan train movement is that kids were placed into homes and taken off the streets. A disadvantage is that often they became slaves and had to do much hard labor. So you'll hand out the And the Arizona Story paper with the names of orphans and their destination. Read through the explanation as a class and discuss. You'll read through the placement of orphan train riders' directions and hand out the railroad map. And you'll explain that they'll use an atlas to locate the cities listed and identify them on the railroad map of the U.S. Next, you'll have the students create a legend on the railroad map with a different colored box for each person. The students will then trace or draw the best route from New York City to their new location using the color codes. Discuss the similarities and differences of the routes. So a completed example of this is shown here with the different travelers and the color of their route. You'll also assume that the towns that are away from the routes, the travelers will take some other way to get their horses or something. So this is the placement of orphan train riders, and it shows the destinations and the travelers. And this is the railroad's routes. So then you'll continue with the Arizona story. And you're explaining that no children were placed by the Children's Aid Society in Arizona. However, there was another organization. It was the Catholic Church. Some Catholic nuns decided to place their wards within the state of Arizona, and they sent them to the Clifton-Morenci area. And when these riders got to Clifton-Morenci, they were placed with the Catholic families in the area. And the Catholic families in the area were Hispanic, and the kids coming over were Anglo. And when people saw what was happening, when the Anglo kids were getting off the train and placed with Hispanic families, a vigilante group got together and they went and kidnapped the families, the kids from those placed families. This went through the court system, and the U.S. Supreme Court sided with the vigilantes based on race, and so the kids were brought back to New York City. So for the letter that the students are going to then write, you'll explain that they'll take on the role of one of the orphans to write a letter to his or her caseworker. You'll display the criteria, and then you'll have the students, you'll ask them how the Arizona orphans situation differed from the Children's Aid Society orphans. So the group of orphans that went to Arizona compared with the other ones. For the assessment, the students will correctly score 80% or higher on the map locations, legend, and railroad route for a geography grade, and they'll score a 4 or higher on the 6-trait writing rubric in the areas of ideas and organization. For extensions, there are some really good orphan train websites that you can gather more stories of the children, and those are listed. There's also a video called The American Experience, the orphan trains, along with a teacher's guide on the PBS website. And that concludes All Aboard the Orphan Trains.